Fire up the recording. Good morning, good morning, good morning. We are going to continue our GAR series this fine Friday with buyer brokerage agreements. We are getting to the nitty-gritty, getting to the end of our series here with just a few more sessions to go to cover. We've covered purchase and sale agreements, contingencies, disclosures, some forms that you weren't aware of, all kinds of things up to this point. And if you haven't seen those others, um, or didn't get a chance to participate live, or maybe you did and you want to go back and just refresh yourself, they are all on the Remax Center website. Not website, but YouTube channel. That's what I meant. So feel free to check that out. All right, today we're covering the buyer's brokerage agreement, which is kind of important these days with the changes from the settlement and everything like that. It's kind of important. So let's talk about what you have to do first. When do you get a buyer brokerage agreement signed? Sure.
Before you show any property.
Before you show any property. So the days of I used to go to closings and I didn't understand. Agent whips out a buyer brokerage agreement at the closing table and has them sign. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, that is so not, even back then, not remotely reasonable. But now it is very, very clear. You must get an agreement signed prior to showing property. Now, you'll notice I didn't say buyer brokerage agreement signed prior to showing property because you can get other forms of agreements, right? And can you show property without an agreement?
Yes.
Depends.
Mhm. So the answer to that is no, but
Mhm.
not as and no ands, just buts. Um,
If I preview it for a prospect, I can do it.
if you preview it without a person, correct.
Yes,
But if you're showing it to that person via like video or something, that counts as a showing. So you
that's
need an
right. Yeah.
agreement. But the reason why I say you can't show a property without an agreement is a listing agreement. This is the catch. Counts. If you are showing someone your listing, you have an agreement. You have an existing agreement with your seller that covers your ability to show that property to represented, unrepresented, neighbors, doesn't matter. Anybody that wants to see that property, you can show that property without doing any additional paperwork. Now, what happens if that person you showed that listing agreement, I mean, that you're listing to, says, well, can we go see the one down the street? Mhm. Unless it's your listing, you gotta
Agreement.
get another agreement with that buyer now, right? What happens if that buyer says, "Oh, I love this house. I want to buy it, and I don't have an agent. I don't want one." Do you need another agreement? You need an authorization
Yes.
to work with
Yeah.
the customer, right?
Customer
So
agreement.
we'll go through that one as well. All right, so we are going to go live and in person. Uh,
Brett, I'm sorry. Can we go back one slide? I just got a clarifying question. And
okay,
that was, what if you were on a team and you have a listing agreement? That listing agreement is really for everybody in the team, correct? Meaning I have a listing, Robin can show it without a signed BBA because it belongs to the team, correct?
so let's go one step further beyond the team. Whose listing is your listing?
Well, that was my next question.
Remax.
Rematch.
Remax.
Your listing is actually my listing,
Right.
right? And so is Dan's, who's not on your team, just to clarify. And so technically, if you're operating as a representative of the seller, which you can do with, as you know, an agent within the brokerage that represents that seller. You could, it's kind of almost like going back to old school sub agency. You can theoretically do that. Um, what I would say is be careful. Okay. You want to be very clear in all of your communication, and you want to be very clear in what you're trying to accomplish. If you are on a team and you are showing someone the property because the lead listing agent can't be there or doesn't want to be there or whatever, but you're truly representing the seller as their agent, an extension of that listing agent, then you want to make that clear to that client. You want to make sure that they understand that. What's one of the ways to do that? There's a form called the ABCs of Agency. And I would give that to everyone before I showed them property. I would give it to everyone before I had them sign an agency agreement. I would give it to everyone as we discussed potentially working together. I would give it to everyone as they potentially thought about, oh, well, I'm thinking I might want to buy something. Well, hey, I know there's been a lot of news about agency and stuff. I thought I'd give you this document just so you could check it out. And then we can discuss what kind of agency you want to do as we move forward. It's fine. Right? Because you're educating them so that they understand you represent the seller, you don't represent them. You represent them, you don't represent the seller. You don't represent them, you don't represent the seller. Like there's options, right? And how that works. So I do highly recommend that as a uh, way to explain. So yes, technically covered when you're showing a listing that we have, when you're representing the seller. But you have to be very careful that you are telling them that you're representing the seller. Because if you are showing them as a prospective buyer that you want to go work with, well, now you need to explain to them agency and all those sorts of things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Brett, can I add this? Real world, last weekend, I got a text and said, I want to see, this address that was my listing. I
Mhm.
said, great, it's on Supra. Great, it's on Supra because, I don't know who this is. And then I got, I'm not an agent. And I said, okay, are you working with or are you working with an agent? It was like 50 questions. So I just said, hey, give me a call, because it's just easier than text, right? So I
That's because
basically
you're
said,
old,
okay, I'm the
but
listing
that's
agent.
okay.
Yeah, I'm the listing agent. I represent the seller. I'll be happy to show you the property.
Yeah.
And we did. But I just wanted to clarify it for,
And
just
I
like you're
always
saying.
say, who's the best person to show a listing?
Listing agent. In this case, it
Listing
was
agent.
me.
So even if they have an agent, whatever, like if they want to see the property, if their agent wants them to see the property, however that transpires, show them the property, right? Like do your seller the service of exposing them to the property. All right, let's jump in here to the buyer brokerage agreement. So let's assume that we don't have a listing and we're just working with Adam, who's wandering down the street. I met him at a cafe and he said something about buying a house. And I was like, dude, let me go show you some houses. And of course, Adam was like, well, of course. Why wouldn't I go show houses with you, go see things? And so I say, all right, well, we need to do a buyer brokerage agreement in order to ensure that you understand how agency works, how commission works, how whatever language we want to use. But we need to be very clear as to what we're doing here. So I'm going to pull this out on my little tablet that I have with me and walk through this with him. And so, exclusive buyer brokerage agreement engagement agreement just says that for in consideration of the mutual promises contained herein, you understand that the undersigned broker, that's me, and Remax Metro Atlanta or Remax Center or whatever, do hereby enter into this exclusive buyer agreement on the terms and conditions set forth. Okay, and we'll go over those terms together. Is that good? Adam, you gonna role play with me this morning?
Yes, that sounds fantastic.
Excellent. So today's the 18th. I'm going to fill the 18th in here. And I know you said that you weren't in a real rush to buy a property. What do you say we put July 4th just as a fun ending date for our contract here? Does that
Works
work?
for me. Yep.
Excellent, excellent. So I do not offer dual agency, even though it is legal in Georgia. So I'm going to go ahead and mark this. So let's stop for a second. You have the right to mark whichever things you do not offer as a representative of us, the brokerage. We, as a brokerage, do not do sub-agency, really. Um, but we do allow you to do dual agency if you want. I highly discourage it, but that's just that. All right, so let's talk about Adam. I know that you've probably seen the news about compensation and things, right?
Oh, yes.
Of course. So I, like you, don't work for free. What do you do for a living again?
I'm a marketing executive.
Marketing executive. Of course you are. You look like a marketing executive. Um, and so I imagine when you go into work, you have an expectation of how much you're going to get paid for the work that you're doing. Is that right?
Oh, yes, sir.
Excellent, excellent. So for me, my value is that I get paid 13 bananas for every transaction that I do with a client and represent their interest. And I'm going to talk to you more about through this whole process of the value that I bring to the table and the reason that you want to work with me, not just because, we met at the cafe and it happens to be, although that happens sometimes, we're going to go through that. So I'm going to put my number in here, and I'm going to say possible payment of compensation by the seller or the seller's broker. I'm assuming that it's okay if the seller or the seller's broker wants to pay my compensation on your behalf. You're okay with that?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm going to go ahead and mark that. Um, we aren't going to talk about leases, so I'm just going to put NA in here because you're not interested in leasing and I'm not interested in showing you rentals. So we're going to go through there. And then I'm just going to throw a protected period in here. I always put 180 days. I like to look at this as hey, I'm not going to screw you over. You shouldn't screw me over context. So I'm going to throw 180 days in here. All right.
All
I
right.
love your role play that you're not pushing back at all, which is great. It
Wait,
makes me
Adam, how come you didn't even ask about what that protected
Well,
period?
I'm curious. Brett, can we go back? I've got a couple questions. Sure, I haven't had enough coffee.
Uh-huh. Yeah, 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 yeah. I caught you early in the morning. That's the
Yeah,
cold.
can we go back to the compensation? You kind of went over that quickly, and I just don't know. Is that something I pay as the buyer?
It is something that you're agreeing to pay because you're paying for my services. Now, as I mentioned, it is possible that the payment might come from the seller or the seller's broker. And we'll talk a little bit more about that a little further into the contract, okay?
And what I'm just curious, what's your experience been? Do most sellers pay that compensation?
I have been able to successfully negotiate that in the last 8 contracts that I've done.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good to know.
So it's pretty consistent.
And then you just mentioned something, protection period. Is that what you called it?
Yes, that's a protection period. So that is if I go show you the house down the street and you love it, but
Uh-huh.
you decide, I think I'm going to try and cut this agent out of this. I'm going to do this without them. You're going to have to wait 180 days to do that.
Oh, okay. Well, I would not ever do that. You seem like such a nice guy. Why would I do
Well, of
that?
course I am, right? And you are too. So, as a powerful marketing executive, you wouldn't want to get cut out of a deal either, would you?
No, not at all.
Exactly. So,
Now, let me
um,
ask you something else, Brett. What happens if I fire you and I hire a new agent? Do I
Um,
still have to
we're
wait?
gonna we're gonna cover that in the heart of this contract, okay?
Oh,
So
okay.
let's go through the contract because I like to go through and make sure that you answer all of your questions
Uh,
and get every detail that you're going to need to get through. And I understand you're a marketing executive, so we're going to go kind of quick. But if you do have something that you have a little question about, please slow me down, and let's go over it. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Exclusive buyer agreement. This means that you and I are exclusive. We're going steady at this point in the world of real estate. Okay.
All right.
You can't work with other agents. You can only work with me, and I will only work on your behalf for the transactions that we're going forward through. The term we talked about, obviously, the term is the dates that we put in through July 4th. And of course, we can extend this if we both agree. And it does automatically extend if we go under contract and that contract extends but beyond that July 4th so that we can finish out the transaction. Make sense?
Okay.
So let's talk about
Hey,
agents.
stepping out of character for just a second, if
Uh-huh.
you're 1 day agreement with somebody, you're saying that if we go under contract, the agreement extends through closing.
Correct.
Got it.
Yep. So yeah, 1 day agreement is an option. 1 week agreement, like whatever you want to do, there's no longer a set time period. I was talking to an agent yesterday that is doing a new agreement every weekend for their clients because that is what they want to do. I gave them some ideas on how we could try to not have to do that over and over again. But we'll talk about that in a minute when we talk about the non-exclusive when we get to that. Um, I'm going to have given you the ABCs of agency, but I also want to make sure you understand that I don't do dual agency. That's a big thing for me personally, because I like to harp on that. And it really, to me, it helps show that my commitment is to Adam, not to the dollar, right? I'm going to represent Adam. If I run into a situation where he's going to buy one of the properties I have listed, I'm going to probably get another agent involved and figure out the best way to do that from that perspective. Um, I agree, Sharita. I find it helpful in building trust. I think it helps build that out. So, um, all right, so then we talk about compensation. Like I said, Adam, we're going to talk a little bit deeper into the compensation. So this is your obligation to pay me. The end of the day, you're agreeing that my services are worth money to you. As I mentioned, I'm going to negotiate on your behalf. We're going to see if we can get the seller or somebody to cover that compensation for you. But if we do not have any compensation coverage from anyone, you are going to be responsible for paying my compensation at closing. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. So that's really it. If you want to read this section on the protected period, it basically explains that the protected period goes unless we choose to mutually terminate. If 2 or 3 weeks into this, I realize that you're a little bit crazy and you realize that I'm a little bit crazy, we can mutually terminate this and everybody go on their separate ways. No harm, no foul. Okay?
Uh-huh.
Brett,
Yep.
what if Adam says, I only want to pursue properties where the seller is going to pay your brokerage fee?
Well, that's a great question. So what I'm going to say is that I really want to make sure we don't limit what you can look at. Let's trust my negotiation power. Let's cross that bridge when we get to it. I want to find you the property that fits you and works for you the best. So I don't want to limit the properties that you can see. Um, and there are a lot of properties these days that the seller is not very open about what they're willing to do or not willing to do. It's not in the MLS anymore. And so it's important that we get you to see what properties you want and what you might want to buy. And then we'll cross the details. That's just one of the many details that we'll have to negotiate as we negotiate the contract. Does that make sense? Okay. Um, Other terms and conditions, my duty to you is to locate the property, help you locate the property, make all disclosures, comply with the law, right? Well, none of us want to break the law, and I don't look good in orange. So that's just one of those things. And then we're going to assist in negotiating the terms and filling out these pre-printed forms that like we're looking at now. Now, your responsibilities to me as your broker are to be available to see property when we arrange to see it. Now, I'm going to tell you in this market, it's kind of crazy. There's property that's been on the market for a long time. There's also property that goes under contract quickly with multiple offers. So when we see a property that fits your needs, we need to try and go out and see it very quickly. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, great. You need to provide me with accurate information. If you are going to jail next week for the next 12 years, I
Again.
need you to tell me, right? So, anything that might affect this transaction, I need you to let me know. And I need you to let me know what you like, what you don't like, what you're looking for, what part of town. I don't get offended if we walk into a property and you hate it. Tell me. Okay, it's not my property. Even if it's my listing, I won't get offended. It's fine. We want to make sure that you will get the properties that you want. You want to make sure that you carefully read everything that get put in front of you. Okay, because it is your duty in this state, buyer beware, to read everything and understand it. So you want to get through that. You do that. You are, of course, working exclusively with me, and not with any other real estate people. And you don't want to go out and see any properties without me, or at least without talking to me about them first. If you see a property, let me know, because just like wanting you to be available, I know you want me to be available too. And we'll figure that out and make sure that we can get you in those properties, whether it's for sale by owner or a listed property or whatever. Okay.
All right.
Excellent. All right. So this is my authority and responsibility. I can show properties that you're interested in. I have no duty to inspect the property. Okay. Understand I'm a real estate agent. I am not an inspector. And so while I have experience in things and I will be able to point that, okay, we're going to want somebody to come in and look at that. Or that might be something we might want to take an interest in. We're not operating outside of the scope of my skills. All right. So I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a mortgage broker, and I'm not an inspector. Does that make sense?
Yes. And are you a fiduciary?
I am actually not a fiduciary under the state of Georgia. It is kind of a weird thing because I feel that responsibility personally, but I don't legally have that responsibility, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. So it sounds like you owe me care.
I do. Yes. I need to care about you. And that is how I operate with my clients, is I care very deeply about their future and what they're going to be happy with versus just my own business, right? Because my business grows because I care about people. And that's how I get a lot of my future business. Um, I am not responsible for making sure that you do what you're supposed to do and comply with things. So I'm going to remind you about things and I'm going to help point out deadlines and things like that. But you're responsible for meeting those deadlines. Like I said earlier, you need to read everything. So you are responsible. You're an adult. I get it. Like let's just act like it and move forward. And I don't have any authority to bind anything on your behalf. I cannot sign something for you. Your signature is your signature. Your signature alone will bind you to any kind of agreement, whether it's this one or any contracts that we might have or changes to contracts in the future. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Excellent, excellent. Um, Big bold sections in these forms are always ones you want to take a glance at. Because they're bold for a reason. All caps, bold, kind of means they're important. And basically, what this saying is a limit on our liability. It's effectively saying I'm not liable for things happening that I wouldn't have control over. I'm not liable for anything related to cyber fraud. I'm sure you've heard that in the news that people are losing, massive amounts of money by wiring to the wrong people, getting hacked and those sorts of things. So it's important that you understand all of that. Disclosures, anything you tell me is between me and you, unless I have to disclose it by law. Okay? So feel free to tell me stuff. My clients often tell me stuff I don't want to know, but that's okay. I want to make sure that I know everything I can know to help make sure that we get you through this process and get you smiling and happy at the end of it in the property that you want. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Excellent, excellent. So any fraudulent activities, if you happen to be not who I think you are, and you're trying to scam out, an insurance company or a mortgage or whatever, I'm going to have to report you by law. Okay. So just to know that, that's just the way that works. And just so you know, I don't have any special expertise in detecting fraud. But if I get that weird feeling, I'm probably going to report it anyway. Okay.
All right.
Miscellaneous, a bunch of things. Hey, anything that arises out of this, we're going to try to arbitrate first. It's a lot cheaper than going to court. And assignability, you're allowed to assign this. You can read through these later. They're just full-on definitions of what we are. There's a section here that talks about buying a property sight unseen. I don't highly recommend that. At minimum, we need to do some video walkthroughs of the property unless the listing agent has really done a great job with their marketing pieces and full systems. Even then, I probably want to do a live walkthrough with you. But that's going to give you the opportunity to see properties, and we'll go through that process on otherwise as well. There are certain properties. You are a U.S. citizen?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so if you weren't, there's some things that fall under that entire agreement. This is it. GAR forms, fair housing. Obviously, we follow fair housing laws. I can't direct you to specific types of properties and things focused on anything that's protected under the fair housing from that perspective. But do feel free to ask me questions about the area and the community, and I'll answer as best I can about the things that I know or point you into resources that might help you better.
All right.
Governing law, hazardous conditions. Do understand some of the properties we go in might not be in the best condition, depending on what we're looking at, right? And so we want to be very careful, and you understand that it's your responsibility to be careful and not get hurt. And if you do get hurt, I didn't hurt you. It's not my fault. Okay. Independent contractor relationship is how I have my business. You can see this, the survival of the rights and obligations beyond this here. Third-party vendors. I'm going to help connect you with potential people that will help you with certain things like mortgage, title, closing, inspectors, whatever. If you want some referrals for those, I obviously work with lots of those people every day. And I'm happy to refer those, but it is your responsibility to do your due diligence on whether you want to work with those people or not. Okay. There are thousands of inspectors, there are thousands of mortgage companies, there are thousands of attorneys. Just because I say their name doesn't make them the best in the business for you. And everybody's situation is different. This talks about how you can default. I'm sure that's not going to happen, but that's where that protected period comes in pretty significantly, is that you can unilaterally terminate this, but that protected period does stay in effect. And if we're under contract and you close on that property without me, then I'm going to get paid regardless, right? Like that's what you're agreeing to do. We talked about cyber fraud. We're going to talk about cyber fraud a lot. You have to understand that cyber fraud's a big deal. People lose hundreds of thousands of dollars. I haven't had a client do it, but I know people that have. So you want to be careful with that. You want to be careful with identity theft, right? That's a big thing these days. So we're going to make sure that we connect you with people that are good and all those sorts of things. Brochures. Well, I've already given you that ABCs of agency pamphlet. I emailed it to you. Remember, you got it? Excellent.
Yes.
Um, and so I'm going to give you, because we're looking at properties in town, I'm going to go ahead and give you this lead-based paint pamphlet and mold pamphlet, just some environmental concerns that you might have with specific properties that we want you to look at. Radon as well is an environmental concern here in Georgia in particular. We're going to send you the protect yourself when buying a real property. We're going to send you what to consider when buying a real property in a community association and a condo, because I know that we're looking at a couple of different options, both single family and condo townhome options. We aren't looking at any new construction, but I'm going to go ahead and send that to you just in case we come across one that just fits the bill. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Hopefully we don't buy anything in a flood area, but I'm going to make sure you understand what that is. And so over the next few days, I want you to take the time to go through all of these disclosures that I'm going to send you and read them. Remember, we talked about that part of your responsibility is to carefully review everything that we put in front of you. And this is part of what you need to review. You need to make sure that you're educated. I'm going to educate you in person as we go, but I want to make sure you cover everything. And the reason we document all of these things is so that you can make sure that you get everything you need and you come out of this as the most educated buyer you possibly could be. And I know you've bought homes before, right? So you have experience. But I will tell you, you've seen the news, the industry changes rapidly, changes every day. So do take the time to read through these and make sure you understand them. And can come back. If you have questions about any of them, please feel free to come back and ask questions. Okay?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. Special stipulations we would put in here if there was anything special we needed to stipulate. There's nothing that I can think of. Is there anything you can think of that we should stipulate?
Mm, no.
Okay, excellent. Well, then we will go on here to the acceptance that you are acknowledging that you've read all the provisions and disclosures made in here and that you understand them. You don't have any questions? Any questions?
No, sir.
Okay, then I'm going to click these. I'm going to sign it to you, send it via email, and you can sign it right now. And then we'll go look at that house this afternoon.
All right. That sounds very exciting. Very thorough
Sounds
explanation.
wonderful, doesn't it?
Yes.
All right, that was fun. That was a good way to do that. So, any questions from the rest of the group on that process or this particular document? No? Okay, we did a great job. Good job, Adam. Thank you. All right, so let's go on. We mentioned this is the exclusive broker engagement agreement. This is the one you want to use as often as possible, because it makes them your client and your client alone, right? What about those clients that don't want to be your client and your client alone? That want to acknowledge that they will pay you for the properties you show them, but they're working with other people in other parts of town or whatever. They're just adverse to exclusivity. They just, for whatever reason, don't want to do it. Well, we have this non-exclusive buyer brokerage agreement. In today's day and age, I want you to understand that this is not a bad document. This is a good document. It does work. It is something that you can do. So I want you to understand that you have the ability to use this form instead of the exclusive. Now, what's the drawback of using this form?
Someone else may find them a property and, all your work was for naught.
So, unlike with the exclusive, if you've been showing them property, showing them property, showing them property, and they happen to see property with someone else that they like, and then they buy, you won't get paid. Whereas with the exclusive, you would, right? So that's the reason that this form is not as powerful. But that ultimately is the only difference between these two forms, is the exclusivity. You notice these sections look really, really the same. I think almost word for word, as you scroll through them. This explains the non-exclusivity aspect of it. But do understand that once you enter into a contract with someone, that you're exclusively representing them in that contract, right? Because you're exclusively representing that transaction. Does that make sense? And I think you should explain that
But
to
there's a question, well, two questions. So is there anything in here about that old phrase procuring cause?
them. I
I don't
don't
remember it,
believe
but you have a
so.
better memory on this.
No, I don't
Okay.
believe so.
Okay.
So let's go through this non-exclusive because this paragraph is probably the most important to understand in this because I think the rest of it is pretty much the same. The buyer hereby agrees to hire the broker to act as the buyer's non-exclusive real estate broker in locating and to the extent requested by the buyer, negotiating the purchase or exchange of real property on behalf of the buyer and filling out pre-printed form contracts for the buyer's review and approval. The buyer is not a party to any current exclusive buyer brokerage agreements. It's important to explain that, make sure that they aren't, right? Dan, as he pointed out earlier, the first thing he asks is, are you working with a buyer or a broker, right? The buyer acknowledges the buyer may have to pay previous broker compensation if the buyer is subject to a current exclusive, terminated the previous without consent of the previous broker, enters into a contract of purchase that as that term is defined herein, would have the term, blah, 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 or enters into a contract to purchase or lease protected properties during the protected period. So just because they're out of that previous one, if they went in and they showed 123 Main Street, and now 2 weeks later they've got a non-exclusive with me, their exclusive has expired, but they're inside the protected period and they buy 123 Main Street, there's potential for double payment there. Now, the argument can be made, the arbitration can be done, the um, push can be done. There's so many different ways that that might go down. But if you end up in that type of situation, please call me so that we can walk through it and make sure that we protect the client, because the client's the one that's going to suffer if they have to pay twice, right?
So can you think of a way to preclude that they had some prior agreement? Like, do you want it in writing that you didn't have a
They
prior?
are signing a document that
Yeah, I
says
know.
you really want to push the issue, add some initials next to this paragraph so that they read it.
Uh, yeah, because nobody wants a lawsuit.
No, nobody wants to get in the middle of that. It's not fun. Trust me, I've been involved. I've been doing this 20 years, so I've seen it. And it's not fun. It's not something you want to do. Term, same as the other one. Agency and brokerage, same as the other one. Compensation, same as the other one. Duties, same as the other one, except for the buyer's duty to work exclusively with you as a broker. It's the only one that's missing. In fact, it just says work non-exclusively. It's kind of a weird statement, but okay. Authority, responsibility, the same. The big, bold, all caps paragraph, liability, the same. Disclosures, the same. Potentially fraudulent. All of these things are the same. And it is not, buyer defaults, warnings, the brochures that you should go through, all of those sorts of things. Now, with the non-exclusive, let's talk about retainer fees for a second. Anybody do retainer fees? Alex is not on the call this morning, but she does on most all of hers, because she is giving so much expertise, advice, and things to investor type people that have a tendency to wander off. She instituted doing some retainers up front, not significant, but enough that it helps them stay focused and not wander as much from that standpoint. So something you should consider from that perspective. And then of course, signatures basically the same as any. So you can have this filled out. You can in this or even in the exclusive, you can fill out in the special steps that this applies only to properties in the attached list, which will be updated every week. And so that was, we were talking to an agent that the buyers are making them fill out a non-exclusive every weekend, and then put a list of the properties in there that they're going to see. And then, of course, that list changes during the weekend as they're going to see properties. And I'm like, okay, first, red flag. Second, maybe you choose to do that, but let's do the non-exclusive for an extended period of time and then just add the properties every week as you add properties that you're showing them. And you can do amendments to these. These are amendable just like any other contract. There are amendments to the brokerage agreement that you can fill out, that you can add the properties. Hey, we went and saw these 12 properties this weekend, and those have been added to this. Personally, I would add them ahead of time. But I know that in the real world situation, oftentimes they change, and they go away, or you see different properties, you don't see some, so you might have to adjust with that. The last form that I want to go over real quick is the agreement to work with a customer. This is if you have a buyer that does not want to sign any kind of brokerage agreement and does not want you to represent them, but they want you to show a property. Then you do this. Very, very similar to the brokerage agreements, except for when you get down here into the, you don't see as much of the duties. See how short the duties are. You also notice there's only buyer's duties. There's not a broker duties section because they're not my client. I don't have any duty to them other than just to be honest and have integrity, right? So that's one of the things that when people are saying, "Oh, well, I don't need you to represent me." Okay, so I literally cannot do anything with you. I have no duty to you at all if you sign a customer agreement. You understand that? Somebody might flip and sign a brokerage agreement if you do that. Just depends on the person that you're talking to. So just to know that this is there. And you can obviously use this in addition to the other forms or instead of the other forms. I mean, so things to think about.
Two quick questions, if I can, Brett.
Yeah.
In the prior two agreements, like the non-exclusive specifically, it says something about, you're going to assist in identifying properties. Well, Zillow identifies properties. You don't even have to have an agent, right? So how do you know in a non-exclusive relationship that, you identified the property that they went and pursued without you?
So
That's
here's
why I
the
was asking about
thing,
that
right?
procuring
So
cause thing.
when you're identifying properties for someone in an agreement, them finding it online or even really you sending it to them through an automated portal doesn't really count, right? Like you might try to argue that, but I would struggle to try and argue that if I just had an automated system sending them. Really, really where you're going to talk about identifying properties is I brought you to the property. I'm showing you the property. I did a virtual tour of the property for you, like those sorts of things. And then you just want to keep a record of those, right? That's part of with the non-exclusive. For their sake, they want to keep a record, but for your sake, you want to keep a record as well. And you can
And
upload
the last
those.
question.
You can upload those, listing reports or whatever you have from your showings, the map, right into your app files or your dot loop, into whatever transaction management system you're using, so that you have it as part of the file.
Okay. And so the last question, because it wasn't on your list of documents, but isn't there some GAR showing agreement that was discussed a long
Um,
time ago? I remember that was kind
I
of a
think
patch
there
thing.
is. I'm not a fan of it, so I'm not going to talk about it.
Fair enough.
I think that you should enter into the showing agreement is just if you're showing your listing, you don't need an agreement. If you're showing something that's not your listing, you need an agreement. And that agreement needs to spell out compensation. And it needs to spell out, like, this customer agreement is as minimal as it gets for me. But there are other options that other people have put out there, and you're welcome to follow those. It's my GAR class, so I'm going to teach what I think you should do. And this is what I think you should do to protect yourself and your business. And here's the thing. If you are struggling to get people to sign agreements with you, it goes back to that trust comment that Sharita made. You need to get people to trust you because you are representing their interest. If you are not representing their interest and you're not coming across as representing their interest, that could be why you're struggling. Um, and we need to work on that, not the documents that you're using. Um, there are some special circumstances that happen. I get it. But at the end of the day, you have to make a decision in your business of, are you going to waste time or not? I personally believe that the faster you get a potential client into a property, showing them a property, the better. And I believe that because I used to work for a tech company in the real estate space that we analyze data. And I can tell you with certainty that the faster you get that person that you're talking to at the cafe, like Adam was, into a property, showing them that property, it doesn't even have to be a property that they end up buying or really want to buy, the more likely they become your client for forever, and the more likely you end up working with them to buy a property and complete a transaction. So those are just pieces of information that you do what you want with them. But the reality is that if you aren't negotiating and able to properly negotiate your business, how good are you going to do for them? Right? Um, I think a lot of those other things are made for weaker agents than you guys are. I think you guys are strong enough to get people to see your value. And if you can't get people to see your value, that's going to be a difficult conversation throughout. It's going to cause all kinds of problems throughout the whole thing. So that's my soapbox for
Well,
today's GAR session from that perspective.
well, one more quick one, Brett, on this last one with the customer. If somebody says I can do it myself, right? So
Yeah.
where's the line if you show them property between showing them property as a customer and giving advice?
That's the line. You notice that, remember, there's no duties for you to them in this. You cannot advise them on anything as a customer. You are purely doing documentary work for them at that point. You are only filling out forms, period. That's all you're doing. And they're telling you what to put. You're not saying to them, would you like, here's the due diligence. Do you want 7 or 10 days? I think you should do 10. You're saying, here's the due diligence. What number you want me to put in? Right? You are not advising
Yeah.
them in any way, shape, or form. And that's where you have to be careful, because without an agency agreement with a customer acknowledgement is not, it is a customer agreement. Without an agency agreement, whether exclusive or non-exclusive, I cannot share my expertise with you.
Right.
So I would
So
have
sticking with
no duty whatsoever to remind them of timelines.
None, zero.
and on due diligence, if they say, what's due diligence? You just have to point them to that part in the
Yep. Here's the
agreement
paragraph that explains due
and not give
diligence.
them
And you can
advice.
read it to them if you want, but you're not going to explain it beyond that. I
So
mean,
don't remind them to deposit earnest money, nothing. Just,
nothing.
huh.
They're a customer.
Victoria, it goes against every core
It's
your
so
being.
hard.
It does.
Every
And you
core of your
can't
being
say
as
to
a GAR
them,
agent, it
yeah,
just like,
you can't say, oh, this is such a nice quiet street, or this is such a, like, you can't say shit. You can't say anything.
Hmm.
And so it's hard. But, you know, what I would hope is that um, if you build a good relationship with someone, they start out because they're whatever that personality type is. We won't dig into dissing my personality type, that wants to not do an agency agreement and wants to do a customer acknowledgement. That at some point in your working with them of showing them property and having conversations where they're asking you things and you're like, I can't tell you that. You're a customer, not a client. That sort of thing. They will say, look, I really would like to get some of these questions answered. What would it take for us to be an agency agreement? Because I assume that the customer agreement you would do probably at a lower compensation than you would an agency agreement because you're not doing much. You're filling out forms. Um, you're not negotiating for them, really. You're providing a pathway for them to negotiate on their behalf, but you're not really providing much professional support other than access to the forms and a portal with which to send them through.
Not much of a valuable service.
They do not pay the $10. The $10 is one of those Georgia contract law things that says for in acknowledgement, and it says everybody acknowledges that the $10 has been paid basically, which it hasn't, but everybody acknowledges that. So, but good question, excellent.
So in that case, if I had a customer and I'm not on the seller side, I'm just on the buyer side working
Right.
with them as a customer. Am I not responsible for submitting forms to like the attorney and to the lender? That's their job also.
Technically, it's their job. Yeah.
Jeez. Okay.
It's hard, right? Like it's it's what I think people think real estate agents do. And it's the limits with which I think so many people think our industry actually acts. And they don't realize how little or how much we actually do on their behalf. Now, there's nothing
So,
wrong
so
with
could I say
saying
like
you
through this
can
process, be like,
say
you're really screwing up. You need me to help you because you're about to lose a lot of money.
you
Can
can.
I-
You can share your opinion on those sorts of things. You can even there's nothing to say that you can't say to them, "Hey, don't forget to send a copy of this contract to your lender and attorney."
Okay.
Like that you can, but you can't advise them that they need to send it in order to get the closing and working, right? Like that's not your thing.
Hmm.
All you're doing is filling out forms.
Okay.
So think about that.
Yeah, I'm
It's
surprised Zillow doesn't have something for that.
Well, Zillow has their showing thing.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, here's a blank form, fill it out.
Yeah, you got it. Well, luckily, Zillow is a national entity, and the variance, having worked in a company that worked in 8 different states, the variance of contracts for real estate from one state to another is significant, to the point that Zillow could not produce a form that covered every state. It would be 300 pages long, and you'd have to like basically just drop out every other paragraph or page or whatever, depending on what state you're in. I mean, the California contract is, I don't know, 40 pages long, something like that. It's insane. So just we're lucky here in Georgia to have a reasonably short contract. All right. Next time, we're going to talk about listing agreements. So we will see you next week. I appreciate you all coming and have a wonderful, wonderful weekend and do
You
something
too.
fun or sell a house, one or the other.
Or both.
Or
Or both.
both. Good idea. Good idea. All right. Thank you
Thanks,
guys.
All right.
Brett.
Thanks,
Bye.
Brett.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.